The house was quiet except for the soft clinking of silverware against a plate. Brian sat at the kitchen table, slowly working through his dinner, his fork scraping lazily across the porcelain. His eyes kept flicking toward his wife, who was pacing in the hallway with her phone pressed tight to her ear. Evelyn's voice was bright, animated, a low laugh spilling out every so often. She was so absorbed in the conversation that she had forgotten all about the meal she had set on the table. Brian set his fork down with a muted thud and leaned back in his chair. He could hear bits and pieces of her words, though not enough to string together the full picture, but her tone, light, excited, almost childlike, told him more than enough. By the time she ended the call, her face was glowing as if someone had lit a candle behind her eyes. "Guess what?" she said, slipping back into the kitchen. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement. "Mom and Dad invited us to their place for New Year's. Dad even froze the pond out back for skating. And they're planning fireworks. It's going to be wonderful." Brian's brow furrowed. He dabbed at his mouth with a napkin before replying. "Evelyn, you know how this works. Mom and Amanda are coming here. They always come here. That's our tradition." The warmth in her smile faltered. "Brian, it's been 10 years. 10 years of the exact same thing. Your mom and sister show up, the kids run wild, and I'm stuck in the kitchen for 3 straight days. That's not a tradition. It's a prison sentence." His tone softened at first, as if he thought reasoning with her would fix it. "Come on, Evie. It's family. They expect to be here. We've always hosted. That's what we do." She shook her head, her voice rising just slightly. "No, that's what I do. You think I don't notice? Every year I spend New Year's Eve with my hands in a sink of dirty dishes while everyone else drinks and laughs in the living room. I'm tired, Brian. I can't keep doing this." He sighed, reaching across the table to take her hand. But she pulled back before he could touch her. "You're exaggerating," he said, his patience thinning. "We have good times. The kids enjoy themselves. It's not that bad." Her laugh was sharp, humorless. "Not that bad. Do you even hear yourself? I'm telling you, I feel like a servant in my own house, and you call it tradition." His expression hardened, the crease between his brows deepening. "Tradition matters. Mom counts on this. Amanda counts on this. It's how we keep family together. By breaking me apart," she shot back. "Do you realize how drained I feel every holiday, and you just keep saying that's how it's always been? Well, maybe it's time for something new." The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against the walls of the room. Brian stabbed at a piece of meat on his plate, as if the act could punctuate the end of the conversation. "We're not changing it," he muttered. "They're coming here like always." Evelyn folded her arms. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her shoulders slumped, but her eyes carried a glint of something he didn't notice. It wasn't anger. Not anymore. It was resolve. "Fine," she said quietly. "Then you enjoy your tradition." Brian looked up, startled by the cold edge in her tone. But before he could respond, she was already moving toward the sink, rinsing her plate with deliberate calm. To him, it seemed like the argument had ended. But behind the veil of her composure, Evelyn's mind was already racing ahead, shaping a different holiday than the one he imagined. And for the first time in years, she wasn't planning to host anyone. Upstairs, the faint hum of a television drifted from Noah's room. Evelyn paused at his doorway, leaning against a frame as she watched her 9-year-old son sprawled across the carpet with his Lego set. The glow from the screen lit up his earnest little face, and for a moment she simply studied him, wondering how someone so young had already grown used to carrying responsibilities he never asked for. She stepped inside and lowered herself to the floor beside him. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "Can I tell you something?" Noah looked up, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "Sure, Mom." She hesitated, then let out a sigh. "Grandpa froze the pond at their house. He even set up lights around it. Grandma says they're planning fireworks for New Year's Eve. Doesn't that sound fun?" His eyes widened instantly. A grin spreading across his face. "That sounds awesome. Skating fireworks way better than sitting here while Aunt Amanda talks on the phone. And I have to watch the twins." Evelyn's chest tightened. Every year it was the same. Amanda dropped her little boys into Noah's lap with a breezy, "Just keep an eye on them, honey," and disappeared into the living room. The twins were younger, restless, always fighting over toys or crying for attention. Noah, barely older than a babysitter himself, ended up stuck in a corner with them while the adults carried on with their evening. "You don't like that, do you?" she asked gently. He shook his head with conviction. "They're annoying, Mom. I want to have fun, too. Why do we always have to stay here?" His question struck deeper than he realized. Evelyn swallowed hard, a mixture of guilt and exhaustion weighing heavy on her. "Because your dad says it's tradition," she whispered. Noah frowned, confusion clouding his eyes. "But traditions are supposed to be fun, right?" The simplicity of his logic pierced her more sharply than any argument she'd had with Brian. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and kissed him there. "You're right. Traditions should be fun." Silence stretched between them for a moment before Noah's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "So, can't we just go to Grandma and Grandpa's this year? Just you and me?" Evelyn blinked, startled. "You really want to?" "Yes." His excitement bubbled over. "I want to go to the farm, skate on the pond, light fireworks with Grandpa, not sit here and be bored." Her laugh was quiet, tinged with relief. "You know, I was hoping you'd say that." They exchanged a look, half secret pact, half shared rebellion. Evelyn felt a rush of warmth at having her son on her side. For so long she had carried the burden alone, cooking and cleaning while everyone else celebrated. Now with Noah's small but determined voice beside hers, she felt a spark of courage she hadn't allowed herself in years. That night, lying in bed, Evelyn stared at the ceiling while Brian snored softly beside her. Memories of past holidays paraded through her mind. Herself hunched over a roasting pan, scrubbing dishes while laughter drifted from the living room, the sting of hot water against her hands as the clock struck midnight. 10 years of the same suffocating cycle. She had called it duty. She had told herself it was love, but really it was servitude. Her pulse quickened. She was done. Beside her, Brian shifted in his sleep, blissfully unaware. He assumed that like every other year, her anger would cool, her resolve would weaken, and she would fall back into line. He had no idea that something inside her had shifted permanently. By the next afternoon, Evelyn had pulled out a suitcase. She folded Noah's sweaters with care, tucking in his favorite pair of gloves. He hovered nearby, his eyes dancing with anticipation. "Don't tell Dad yet," she whispered, pressing a finger to her lips. He mimicked the gesture, grinning. "Our secret." As the zipper slid shut, Evelyn felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time in a decade, she wasn't dreading New Year's. She was planning an escape, one built not on rebellion for its own sake, but on the promise of joy for herself and for her son. And she intended to keep that promise no matter what. On the evening of December 30th, the grocery store was crowded with people pushing carts piled high with ham, pies, soda, and champagne. Brian maneuvered down the aisles with practiced efficiency, his phone in one hand, a crumpled list in the other. He glanced at the items, mentally picturing Evelyn at home in the kitchen, apron tied around her waist, prepping the endless dishes his family expected. It never occurred to him to ask if she actually had the energy or the desire to do it again. For Brian, it was routine as natural as breathing. By the time he pulled into the driveway, his trunk was full of bags. He grabbed as many as he could carry, balancing them awkwardly against his chest, and shouldered the front door open. "Evelyn," he called, his voice echoing through the quiet house. "Can you give me a hand with these?" Silence. Frowning, he dropped the bags onto the counter and walked through the rooms. The living room was dark, the kitchen spotless, the hallway eerily still. Upstairs, Noah's room was empty, bed neatly made. Evelyn's suitcase was gone from the closet. A chill slid down his spine. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number with shaky fingers. She answered on the second ring. "Brian." Her voice came steady, calm, almost detached. "Where are you?" His tone was sharp with confusion and rising panic. "I just got home." "What's going on?" There was a pause before she replied. "I told you I'm not hosting this year. Noah and I are spending New Year's with my parents." For a moment, he couldn't breathe. "Evelyn, you can't just leave. Everyone's coming tomorrow. Mom, Amanda, the kids, we need you here." "You don't need me," she said evenly. "You need a servant. And I'm done playing that role." The line went quiet, and before he could find the words to argue, she ended the call. Brian stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, his mind racing. He dialed another number, his hands slick with sweat. "Mom," he said the moment Margaret picked up. "I need your help." Evelyn left. "You'll have to come early tomorrow so we can get everything ready." There was a stunned pause on the other end, followed by an incredulous laugh. "Excuse me? You think I'm going to cook and clean on my holiday? I'm coming to celebrate, not to work like some maid." "Mom, please," he urged. Just this once, her tone hardened, sharp as glass. "If Evelyn abandoned her duty, that's her shame. Don't you dare expect me to pick up her slack. I raised you, not her household. Figure it out yourself." The call ended with a sharp click, leaving Brian staring at his phone in disbelief. He tried Amanda next. She answered cheerfully at first, but when he explained, her mood soured instantly. "Wait, you want me to cook? You want me to handle all of that?" She scoffed. "Brian, I can barely keep my boys from destroying my own house. And besides, I don't want to be stuck in the kitchen. No one does. But Amanda, no." Her voice was final. "I'm not your solution." If Evelyn finally snapped, maybe you should think about why. "Good luck, brother." The call disconnected. And Brian lowered the phone slowly, his heart pounding. For the first time in 10 years, he looked around his home and truly saw it. The spotless counters, the empty dining table, the silence where Evelyn's footsteps used to echo. He had always assumed her work was invisible because it was easy, because it was expected. But now, with no one to take her place, the reality struck him hard. Evelyn had been carrying all of it. Year after year, she bore the weight of his family's comfort while they treated her labor as nothing more than background noise. And now that she was gone, the truth was unavoidable. Without her, the tradition collapsed. Snow crunched beneath Noah's boots as he darted across the wide front yard of his grandparents' home. The Harris farmhouse with its white siding and wraparound porch glowed warmly against the cold Tennessee evening. Strings of lights twinkled along the eaves, their reflection glittering on the frozen pond beyond the trees. "Careful, buddy," Mr. Harris called, steadying the boy as he tried to balance a glass star in his small hands. "The top of the tree is a tall climb. We'll get it up there together." Noah laughed, his breath puffing in the frosty air. He craned his neck toward the towering spruce tree set in the front yard, already strung with colored bulbs that blinked like jewels. Evelyn stood a few feet away, her gloved hands tucked into her coat pockets, watching her son's face light up in a way she hadn't seen in years. Inside, Mrs. Harris busied herself in the kitchen, humming along to a Christmas record, still spinning on the turntable. The counters were a gentle chaos, flour dusting the surface, pie crusts lined up to be filled, vegetables chopped and waiting in bowls. Unlike in Evelyn's own home, there was no sense of crushing pressure, no weight of expectation that it all fall on one person's shoulders. Mrs. Harris stirred a pot. Evelyn rolled dough beside her, and when Noah ran in from the cold, asking for hot cocoa, Mr. Harris stepped in to whisk the milk on the stove. The work was shared, effortless in its rhythm. Laughter echoed from room to room. The kind of laughter Evelyn realized she hadn't heard in her house on New Year's Eve in over a decade. Here, no one was a servant. Everyone was family. Later that evening, headlights swept across the long driveway, breaking the stillness outside. Brian's car pulled in slowly, tires crunching against the snow. He sat behind the wheel for a long moment, staring at the glowing windows of the farmhouse, listening to the faint echo of music and voices carried on the wind. When he finally stepped out, the smell of wood smoke and roasted him hit him like a wave. He walked up the porch steps, and before he could even knock, the door swung open. Noah bounded forward, throwing his arms around him. "Dad, come see the tree." Brian's chest tightened. His son's cheeks were red from the cold, his eyes bright with excitement. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her expression calm, but unreadable. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. She looked almost free. "Brian," Mr. Harris said, clapping a firm hand on his shoulder. "Glad you made it. Come on in. Warm up." Mrs. Harris appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "There's plenty of food. We're just finishing up." Her voice held no judgment, only welcome. Brian stepped inside, suddenly overwhelmed by the simple harmony of it all. The living room was alive with color, the tree shimmering with ornaments, the fireplace crackling, Noah proudly adjusting the star at the top, while Mr. Harris studied the ladder. Evelyn laughed softly at the sight, the sound cutting through Brian's unease. He sank into a chair, his hands restless on his knees, watching as his wife and son moved easily in the warmth of her family. They didn't look burdened. They didn't look tired. They looked happy. For the first time, he felt like an outsider at his own holiday. But no one treated him that way. Evelyn's parents included him in their toasts. Mrs. Harris passed him plates of steaming food, and even Evelyn set a glass of cider in front of him without a word. It was an effortless kindness that made his throat tighten. By the time everyone gathered at the long dining table, the spread was breathtaking. Roast ham glazed to perfection, sweet potato casserole crowned with toasted marshmallows, fresh baked bread, and pies cooling by the window. Candles flickered against the frosted windows, casting a golden glow over the faces around him. Mr. Harris raised his glass to family and to the new year. Glasses clinked, voices rose in harmony, and Brian lifted his own slowly. As he looked across the table at Noah beaming at Evelyn with her eyes bright in the candlelight, he realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't just eating dinner. He was seeing what a real celebration looked like. And the difference unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The next 3 days unfolded, like a storybook. Each morning, Noah rushed outside before breakfast, his skates clutched under his arm, calling for his grandfather to meet him by the pond. The frozen surface shimmered under strings of lights that Mr. Harris had strung along the trees. Noah wobbled at first, but laughter carried him forward, Evelyn steadying him by the hands until his confidence grew. Soon he was gliding across the ice, cheeks flushed, his joy echoing across the frosty air. Brian stood at the edge, his hands buried in his coat pockets. He had never joined them before, never thought to step into the cold for anything beyond hauling groceries inside. Watching Evelyn spin gently with their son, her scarf trailing behind her, something knotted in his chest. She wasn't the tired woman bent over a sink, shoulders sagging under the weight of obligation. She was radiant, her laughter rising like music. Evenings brought bonfires and fireworks. Mr. Harris set logs ablaze in a stone fire pit while Mrs. Harris passed out mugs of steaming cocoa. Noah huddled close to his grandmother, wide-eyed as the first rocket hissed skyward and exploded into a burst of red and gold. He clapped his hands, cheering for the colors that showered down like stars. Evelyn leaned into her father's shoulder, smiling with a kind of peace Brian realized he hadn't given her in years. They walked together through the woods one afternoon, the snow crunching softly underfoot. Noah ran ahead, pointing at animal tracks, his voice carrying through the trees. Evelyn lingered behind with her mother, their conversation quiet, intimate. Brian followed at a distance, his breath clouding the air, realizing just how separate he felt from this circle of warmth. He wasn't excluded. Not by them. They welcomed him at every turn, but he knew he had kept himself apart, assuming the tradition was enough to replace true togetherness. At night, after Noah had collapsed into bed, exhausted from skating and sledding, Brian lay awake beside Evelyn in the guest room. He could hear her steady breathing, see the faint glow of the moon outlining her face. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder, had he mistaken duty for love? Had he mistaken habit for happiness? On the morning of January 2nd, the family gathered to pack away decorations. Laughter still filled the air as they boxed ornaments and brushed crumbs from the table. Noah hugged his grandparents tightly, promising to come back soon. Evelyn kissed her mother's cheek, gratitude shining in her eyes. When it was time to leave, Brian carried their bags to the car. The drive home stretched quiet, the hum of the tires filling the space between them. Noah had fallen asleep in the back seat, his head laying against the window. For miles, Brian said nothing. Then, as the road curved past the last stretch of farmland, he reached across the console, his hand trembling slightly. "Thank you, Evelyn," he said, voice low. "And forgive me." She turned to him, her expression soft, almost surprised. There was no triumph in her eyes, no bitterness, only a quiet acknowledgement of the words she had waited years to hear. She gave him a small smile, the kind that carried both forgiveness and a reminder that he had a long way yet to go. The highway stretched ahead, gray and endless. But for the first time, Brian felt something shift. A weight he had ignored for too long was beginning to lift, replaced by the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could start again. The house was still quiet when the phone rang. Evelyn was folding laundry in the living room, the hum of the dryer soft in the background. Brian picked up without checking the caller ID, pressing the phone to his ear. His mother's voice exploded down the line. "How dare you break our family tradition? Do you have any idea how humiliated I felt when Amanda and I showed up and found no one there? No food, no decorations, nothing." Brian winced, pulling the phone slightly away from his ear. Evelyn looked up from the laundry basket, her hands pausing mid-fold. She could hear every word, sharp and furious, cutting through the room like shards of glass. "Mom," Brian began cautiously. "We talked about this." "No." Margaret snapped. "We did not talk about this. You went along with that woman's selfish plan and ruined everything. Holidays are for family and you let her destroy it. What kind of son abandons his own mother on New Year's Eve?" Evelyn lowered her gaze, choosing silence. Her heart pounded, but she would not give Margaret the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She continued folding, steady, deliberate, while every nerve in her body tensed. For a moment, Brian stayed quiet, caught between habit and the new truth settling inside him. Then something shifted. "Enough, Mom." His voice was firm, carrying a weight it never had before. On the other end of the line, there was a stunned pause. "Excuse me," Margaret hissed. "You heard me," Brian said, standing straighter now. "Evelyn is not your servant. She is my wife, and she has the right to spend the holidays however she wants. We all do." Margaret's gasp crackled through the speaker. "Brian, how dare you speak to me like that after everything I've done for you?" "This isn't about what you've done for me," he interrupted, his tone sharper now. "It's about what you've expected from her. Year after year, you and Amanda walk in here, dump everything on her shoulders, and call it tradition. That's not family. That's exploitation." From the kitchen doorway, Amanda's voice suddenly chimed in. She had joined the call on speaker at her mother's house. "Exploitation? Are you serious? She cooks. She cleans. Big deal. That's what women are supposed to do at holidays. She could have handled it if she wasn't so dramatic." Evelyn stiffened but remained silent, her face calm. Brian's jaw tightened. "No, Amanda. She couldn't handle it. And she shouldn't have to. Do you even hear yourselves? You show up to celebrate, and the only reason you enjoy it is because Evelyn is in the kitchen breaking herself apart to keep everyone else comfortable. Not this year. Not ever again." There's a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Margaret's voice trembled with outrage. "So, what are you saying, Brian? That we're not welcome anymore. He hesitated only for a heartbeat. Then he spoke with finality. I'm saying if you come into this house, you will respect my wife. You will treat her as family, not as hired help. If you can't do that, then no, you are not welcome. The line went dead silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. For once, Margaret had no retort. Finally, her voice returned cold and brittle. You've changed. She's poisoned you against us. Brian shook his head slowly. No, Mom. I finally opened my eyes. Amanda muttered something under her breath before the call abruptly disconnected. The silence afterward was deafening. Brian lowered the phone and looked toward Evelyn. She was standing very still, a folded towel clutched in her hands. Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, there was no barrier between them, only the fragile recognition that he had chosen her publicly and without hesitation. Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, one that carried both gratitude and disbelief. It wasn't a complete victory, not yet, but it was a beginning. And as Brian set the phone down on the counter, he knew the line had been drawn. His mother might never forgive him. His sister might resent him forever. But for once, he didn't care. He had finally defended the woman, who had carried the weight of his family far too long. A year slipped by, carrying the weight of old traditions with it. When December rolled around again, the Bennett household no longer buzzed with the frantic preparations that had once defined Evelyn's holidays. There were no shopping lists taped to the fridge, no counter stacked with pans, no dread creeping into her chest. Instead, suitcases lined the hallway packed with winter coats, boots, and thermoses for hot chocolate. This year, the Bennett weren't hosting. They were heading to a mountain lodge with close friends, trading chaos for quiet trails and frozen lakes. On the morning of December 31st, Noah bounded down the stairs, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Are we leaving soon? He asked eagerly, eyes wide with anticipation. Evelyn smiled at his enthusiasm. He wasn't 9 years old trying to keep younger cousins entertained anymore. He was a boy who finally had the freedom to enjoy the holiday as it was meant to be. For him, New Year's meant skating, sledding, and watching fireworks without being saddled with responsibility that never should have been his. Brian zipped up his coat and loaded the bags into the car. He moved with an ease Evelyn had never seen during the holidays. No tension, no grumbling about schedules, just a man ready to start something new. As they were about to leave, his phone rang. The name flashing across the screen made him pause. Margaret, he answered, his tone polite. Hey, Mom. Her voice came sharp, demanding. So, what's the plan for tonight? Amanda and I are coming over. We expect dinner to be ready when we arrive. Brian chuckled softly, a sound that startled even himself. There's no dinner here, Mom. We're leaving for the lodge. There was silence, then an incredulous gasp. What do you mean you're leaving? You can't just abandon us again. Maybe next year, Brian said lightly, shutting the trunk. But tonight, we're busy. Evelyn, standing beside him, heard every word. For the first time, she saw her husband not as a reluctant bystander, but as a true partner. He wasn't just tolerating her choices. He was standing with her, shoulder to shoulder. Margaret's voice rose in protest, but Brian didn't flinch. We've made our decision. If you want to spend New Year's together, it will be on different terms. Evelyn is not your hostess, and this house isn't your kitchen. Either respect that or don't come. He ended the call before the argument could spiral further. Slipping the phone into his pocket, he turned to his wife with a wry smile. Ready? Evelyn exhaled slowly, a wave of relief washing over her. For years, she had fought this battle alone, her voice drowned out by the weight of tradition. Now at last she wasn't alone. The drive to the lodge was filled with laughter. Noah chattered about snowball fights and bonfires, planning every detail of the night ahead. Evelyn rested her hand on Brian's, her heart lighter than it had been in over a decade. By the time they reached the lodge, twilight was settling over the mountains. Friends greeted them at the entrance, the sound of children's laughter spilling across the snowy grounds. Noah darted off to join the others, his joy unburdened, his shoulders free of responsibility he never should have carried. As Evelyn and Brian stepped inside, warmth wrapped around them, the scent of pine and cocoa mingling in the air. For the first time in years, New Year's felt like what it was meant to be, a celebration, not a sentence. And for Evelyn, it wasn't just a holiday. It was proof that even the heaviest chains could be broken and new traditions could be born. The night sky above the mountains was a canvas of black, pierced by glittering stars and the glow of lanterns strung along the frozen lake. Friends huddled close around bonfires, their laughter carrying across the crisp air. Children darted over the ice, their voices rising with excitement as sparklers lit their small hands. Evelyn stood at the edge of the lake, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders. Brian was beside her, a thermos of cocoa in his hand, and Noah was racing across the ice with the other children, his laughter echoing like music. The crackle of fireworks began in the distance, low booms shaking the cold air before bursts of red, blue, and silver stray across the sky. She tilted her head back, watching the colors fan out above her. For years, this night had been nothing but exhaustion. Her hands raw from scrubbing dishes, her body aching as she listened to laughter float from another room. The memory was so vivid she could almost smell the dish soap, feel the sting of water on her skin. But tonight, those years felt far away, as if they belonged to another life, a life she had finally walked away from. Brian glanced at her, his expression soft, reflective. He hadn't said much since they arrived, but he didn't need to. The way he stood close, the way he smiled when Noah's laughter rang out. It was enough. For the first time, Evelyn felt that they weren't just surviving the holiday. They were living it. Another firework exploded overhead, scattering gold against the dark. She caught its reflection in the ice, then in her own son's face as he skated past. Cheeks flushed with joy. Her heart swelled at the sight. He wasn't burdened anymore. He wasn't a child pressed into babysitting while adults pretended not to notice. He was free, laughing, glowing, and utterly himself. Evelyn took a long breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs. In that moment, she understood something simple yet profound. Traditions matter only when they bring joy. The moment they become chains, it's time to break them and build new ones. She turned to Brian, who was watching her quietly. Their eyes met, and for the first time there was no shadow of resentment between them, just shared understanding. He reached for her hand, fingers wrapping around hers in a steady grip. The countdown began, friends calling out the seconds as the clock ticked toward midnight. Evelyn joined in, her voice rising with the others. 10-9-8. The numbers melted into laughter and anticipation until the sky erupted in a thunderous display of fireworks. Noah shouted with delight, spinning on the ice as red and silver sparks showered overhead. His laughter carried across the lake, bright and unrestrained, a sound Evelyn wanted to hold on to forever. The light from the fireworks danced in her eyes, reflecting off the sheen of unshed tears. She felt no sadness, only release, the weight of the past lifting, replaced by something lighter, freer. Brian leaned closer, his voice barely audible above the noise. "Happy New Year." Evelyn squeezed his hand, her smile soft but certain. "Happy New Year." The booms echoed into the distance, fading into the stillness of the night. The crowd's cheers lingered, but for Evelyn, the moment belonged only to her small family. To Noah's laughter, to Brian's hand in hers, to the quiet promise that they had finally found their way forward. A new tradition had begun. Not one imposed, not one endured, but one chosen. And as the colors of the fireworks cascaded across the winter sky, Evelyn knew this was more than a holiday. It was a new beginning.